Sarah sat at the huge bay window, her camera on her lap, gazing out at the boundless expanse of ocean beyond their beach house. The mellow light of the late afternoon sun projected a warm golden tint across the sea, and the quiet crashing of waves broke the silence that had formed between her and Ethan during the previous few months. Max, their golden retriever, reclined her feet, his head resting on her lap and sighing blissfully. Sarah stroked his fur absent-mindedly, deep in thought. Ethan had been working late again, preoccupied with his current design project. It wasn't uncommon for him to skip supper these days, and Sarah had become accustomed to eating alone, accompanied only by Max. She knew the importance of Ethan's work. His career had always been his passion, but she had recently begun to feel invisible. Their once intense relationship seems to have faded into routine talks and fleeting displays of affection, leaving her yearning for the intimacy they once enjoyed. Max had become her regular company. Throughout these lonely times, she took him for long walks down the beach, taking comfort in the simplicity of his presence. He didn't ask for much, only her presence, and in exchange he offered her the unconditional love she thought she lacked. From Ethan, the camera had also become her escape, capturing the fleeting beauty of the world around her. Hurt to fill the void inside, Sarah looked at the clock as the sun began to set. Ethan had promised to be home for dinner today, but the hours passed with no sign of him. A knot of frustration formed in her chest, which she swiftly pushed down. She did not want to argue, not again. Instead, she grabbed Max's leash and her camera, intending to go for a stroll. Before the last light of day faded, Sarah and Max were walking along the shore, and the air was fresh. The rhythmic sound of Max's paws in the sand and the distant call of seagulls offered a soothing soundtrack to her racing thoughts. She raised her camera to photograph the golden light streaming across the waves, but her heart was not in it. Even when Ethan was present, she couldn't shake the feeling of being alone. When they returned to the house, dusk had set, and Ethan's car was finally in the driveway. Sarah's heart eased briefly, but anxiety returned when she entered the house and discovered him sitting at the dining table staring at his phone. He did not look up when she stepped in. "Hey," she replied, unclipping Max's leash. Max dashed towards Ethan, wagging his tail, but Ethan scarcely recognized him. "Sorry, I'm late," Ethan murmured, his gaze still fixed on his phone. Sarah bit her lip, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's okay, I went on a walk with Max." Ethan nodded absently, still distracted, and the stillness between them grew. Sarah stood there, feeling the weight of their unspoken words, and wondered how long their marriage could endure the growing distance. Sarah had planned the weekend trip as a last-ditch effort to reignite her and Ethan's relationship, which she wore was fading. They had driven up to a quiet seashore cabin, which had previously had wonderful memories. Now that they were seated across from one another at the small wooden dinner table, the air between them was thick with unsaid tension. Sarah's heart fell as Ethan scanned through his phone, ignoring the supper she had prepared. She stared at him, the weight of his absence palpable even though was physically present. "Housework?" she inquired, attempting to entice him into conversation. Ethan looked up, his eyes fatigued, and gave a shrug. "Busy, always busy." His tone was bland and contemptuous. Sarah clenched her hands under the table. The answer was always the same. No depth, no connection. She suppressed her frustration and tried again, this time with a lower voice. "I miss you, Ethan. I feel like you aren't here anymore." Ethan's expression darkened at her words. He dropped his phone on the table and exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. "I am doing the best I can. Sarah, I am providing for us. Isn't this enough?" "It's not just about providing," Sarah explained, her voice shaking. "I need you with me, not only physically but emotionally lately. It feels like you're a million miles away, and Max is the only one who has been there for me." Ethan's gaze shifted to the puppy, who lay blissfully at Sarah's feet. His jaw tensed, and Sarah saw a glimpse of something unreadable in his gaze. "Max, are you talking about the dog now?" His voice was icy with a hint of distrust that sent a shiver through Sarah. She blinked, puzzled by his reaction. "What do you mean? Max has simply been company. I have been lonely." Ethan, and I've noticed how much time you spend with him. Ethan cut her off, his tone low and strained. You're always with him, chatting to him and taking him places. It's as if he replaced me. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What, Ethan? That is crazy. He's a dog, for God's sake. But Ethan was not listening. He pushed away from the table and stood walking across the room. It's not only about dog, Sarah. I realized how remote you have become. You never speak to me like you used to. Maybe I haven't been around much, but you don't even bother to reach out anymore. Sarah stood up, her heart thumping. I haven't reached out because you're never available. I attempted to chat to you, Ethan, but you are constantly preoccupied with work or your phone when I need someone to listen. Max is the only person who does, but he's just a dog. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and something darker hurt. Maybe the problem is that I'm not enough for you anymore. His words hit her like a punch before she could say anything. Ethan grabbed his jacket and walked out of the cabin, slamming the door behind him, leaving Sarah standing there, tears dwelling in her eyes. Ethan sat at the edge of a rocky cliff, watching the sun rise over the water. The night he rushed out of the cottage, he drove aimlessly till he came across this location far from the chaos and agony now. When the early morning light broke through the clouds, he felt the weight of his axe crushing against his chest. He realized he'd overreacted. His mind had transformed Sarah's words and deeds into something they were not. The more he thought about it, the more he knew his envy and wrath were about his own guilt. Not Max's. He had been missing both physically and emotionally for far too long. Sarah had reached out to him in her loneliness, but he shoved her away. He had let work consume him, allowing her to seek consolation in their dog because he had not been present for her. Ethan sighed deeply and ran a hand over his hair. He could not believe how much they had drifted apart. He adored Sarah more than anything, but his own anxieties had blinded him to her requirements. He knew he had to make things right and repair the harm he had caused before it was too late. As he drove back to the cabin, he felt a sense of urgency. When he arrived, he saw Sarah sitting on the porch with Max by her side. She appeared tired, her eyes red from crying. But there was a quiet strength in her posture that made his heart hurt. Ethan got out of the car, his hands quivering slightly. "Sarah," he said softly. As he nodded her, she looked up, her expression unreadable, but did not move. Max wedged his tail when Ethan arrived. As if he sensed the importance of the moment, Ethan stood in front of her, aware of the weight of the silence between them. "I'm sorry," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I have been an idiot. I let my anxieties get the best of me, and I wounded you. I know I haven't been there for you as much as I should have been, and I regret making you feel as if you had to turn to Max because I wasn't enough." Sarah's G softened and she stood up, arms protectively wrapped about herself. "I did not turn to Max because you weren't enough. Ethan, I turned to him because I was lonely and needed someone, but I've never stopped needing you. I just didn't know how to contact you anymore." Ethan's heart squeezed. "You don't need to contact me anymore. I'm here now to fix this. I know I've been neglecting you, Sarah, but I still love you. I love you more than anything else, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears of relief. "I love you too, Ethan," she whispered. "I've always loved you." They stood there, the early morning light enveloping them in warmth, holding one another for the first time in what seemed like forever. Max crawled cheerfully at their feet, a silent reminder of the loyalty and affection that had always existed, even in their darkest hours. They stepped inside together, determined to re-establish the trust and connection they had nearly lost.